There we go.
All right, I want to welcome everyone this morning to our next webinar that we have coming up for the Commercial Nursery and Landscape webinar series that we've been doing. This is put on by the group of area specialized agents with nursery and greenhouse responsibilities. So we've got Neal up. This will be our second webinar in the series, and we're happy to have Joe talking to us today about weed management in nurseries and landscapes. And we really want this to be kind of informal. So feel free to ask questions. You can type it into the chat box and I'll do my best to kind of moderate that and get all your questions answered. So if you have any questions, now's a great time since we have Joe here to get all those answered. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joe. He's our weed specialist for ornamentals. So Joe, take it away.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Well, I'm just going to launch right into it and talk about weed management and really just an overview. Most of you are familiar with these principles, as I have talked in several programs, that, landscape and nursery weed management depend upon these, these methods of sanitation and exclusion, site preparation, mulches, pre-emergence herbicides, post-emergence, hand weeding or cultivation, and our weed management plan will encompass some aspect of every one of these components. But in a typical calendar-based approach to weed management, we often sort of start the year thinking about in the winter, what do we do? Well, we in the winter, we want to deal with trying to prevent the spring weeds from emerging. And that's with mulches and pre-emergence herbicides. And then early spring, we go in to try and clean up things that have emerged. Late spring is a time to reapply pre-emergence herbicides for extended control through the summer and to start managing nut sedges and to clean up some weeds that may have come through our pre-emergent plan. Okay, and then in late summer, we're focused on winter weed control and perennial weed control. But what about here in midsummer? What are some of the things we need to think about right now? And this is, the big one for summer weeds is to keep them from going to seed. Over 90% of the crabgrass seed that are shed this year will germinate next spring. So, if we can stop crabgrass from germinating, from maturing its seed now and dropping its seed, that'll go a long way to reducing the amount of weed cover we have the coming year. We also want to prevent them from going to seed, and because they can spread. In this image, you've got a Palmer amaranth seed head and a horseweed that has not yet started to seed. So if we can, even if we have glyphosate resistant weeds, horseweed and Palmer, coming into our sites, if we can stop them from going to seed, then we will have far fewer problems going forward. All right, so how do we go about doing that? Of course, it's with post-emergence weed control and in landscapes. We've got labor, post-emergence herbicides. In nurseries, we do some cultivation, and that could, in landscapes, that could mean using a hand hoe. But bottom line is we get out there and we control these weeds, hopefully before they can spread and go to seed. Now, there are selective options for controlling a lot of weeds. This is a situation I see a lot of in the middle of summer, is Bermuda grass encroachment into landscape beds, or crabgrass and goosegrass and foxtail getting out of hand. So for grass control, we have a lot of options for landscape and nursery, selective options that we can control grasses in most ornamental beds and crops with an over-the-top application of selective grass herbicides. Now, there are several to choose from. Segment or Sethoxydim, Fusilade is Fluazafop, Envoy is Clethodim, and Acclaim is Phenoxyprop. So For landscape and nursery, we really would not use a claim because that's primarily for summer annual grass control in cool season turf, okay? It can be used in landscape beds, but it's not effective on perennial grasses. It's not particularly effective. Even though we have used a claim for Bermuda grass suppression in tall fescue turf, it really doesn't kill the Bermuda grass, it just slows it down. So we're really talking about segment, fusillade, or envoy. Okay, segment and fusillade both have consumer formulations available, grass beater and grass begone. But for commercial applications, the segment, fusillade, or envoy are the standard treatments. Early applications work best. So you can see this in this photograph. This is a 2-tiller crabgrass plant. This plant is probably, you would see this in spring or early summer. Right now, our crabgrass and our grassy weeds are huge. They're going to be a lot harder to control with these products. And these products work very slowly. They can take 2 weeks to show results. All right, but if you've got grasses growing in and around ornamental plants, where hoeing and pulling is actually going to do damage, like in bedding plants. You got a big crabgrass plant there. If you pull that out, you're likely to pull the bedding plants out with it. This is an option. You could do an over-the-top application and control the crabgrass, goosegrass, foxtail, and Bermuda grass. And this is where, in particular, your perennial grasses like Bermuda grass, you can go in there and hand weed that and clean it up, but the Bermuda will be right back again. You're better off doing an application of an envoy or a segment or a fusillade and letting that work on the Bermuda grass. And then if you want to come in and hand weed to just clean up the bed about a week later, the herbicide will have translocated and moved into the roots and would be doing some work. And of course, in a nursery setting, we wouldn't be overly concerned about those aesthetics. What we'd be more concerned about is the fact that these products will require multiple applications. So you just wait and watch, and when you see the weeds starting to grow back, then you can make the application, a reapplication. Okay. For landscape beds, I get more questions about Japanese stilt grass and how to manage that than any other grass. So I thought I would just mention that in particular, Japanese stilt grass, we managed it just like it was crabgrass. Almost all of our pre-emergence herbicides that work on crabgrass will also control Japanese stilt grass. Spectacle does not seem to be quite as effective on Japanese stilt grass as some of our other standard pre-emergence grass herbicides. Our post-emergence grass control products, segment, envoy, fusillade, all work very well. 2 applications work better than 1, mainly because of just the biomass that stiltgrass produces. When you make 1 application, you just can never get complete coverage. But it is highly susceptible to the post-emergence herbicides, and these can be used as selective, over-the-top applications in broadleaf ornamental beds. Treatments work better if you start early, but the one thing about Japanese stiltgrass is it starts producing its flowers in September. And so we still have time to get control of this one before it can go to seed. We've got really another month and a half before it will start making viable seed. What about nut sedges? I see a lot of yellow and purple nut sedge, and in this slide, the yellow nut sedge is on your left and the purple nut sedge is on the right. So we have selective or somewhat selective products for nut sedge control, Basagran TO, primarily used in turf. It is labeled for use around ornamental plantings. It's sort of a contact type action. And so 2 applications, 14 days apart, will give you pretty good yellow nut sedge control, but it does not control purple nut sedge. Dismiss and Sedgehammer will work on both purple and yellow. Dismiss is better on yellow than purple. Sedgehammer is about equally effective on both of them. Dismiss also is a broadleaf herbicide. It'll control morning glory seedlings and a number of other broadleaf weeds. Dismiss and Sedgehammer both leave a short-term residual in the soil, and that helps prevent yellow nut sedge from coming back. But all of these will damage broadleaf ornamentals if they are applied over the top. So you have to use them as though they were non-selective herbicides. So you have to use them like they were, almost like they were Roundup, right? But just on the purple nut sedge, really the best treatment we have in landscape beds is Sedgehammer. Dismiss gives some control. The problem with Sedgehammer, of course, is it's very, very slow. Both Dismiss and Basagran are going to work a lot faster. Sedgehammer, 2 weeks, you're barely seeing any symptoms. By 3 weeks, the plants have dead growing points. And then you need to make a reapplication at 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, so for that reason, a lot of people, landscapers may prefer to use something like Dismiss or Basagran, but the Sedgehammer does work a little better on purple nut sedge. That's something to keep in mind. These products work better applied earlier in the season because the nut sedges have already started making tubers for next year. So if you haven't controlled the nut sedge yet, get out there and do it and try and stop some of those tubers from forming. But don't forget that, glyphosate, Roundup or any generic glyphosate, Finale will both work on yellow and purple nut sedge, okay? There are a lot of landscapers that say to me that that's not true, but it is. I've been doing this for over 30 years, spraying nut sedge every year. Roundup works every time. We actually did some comparisons between Roundup Finale and Sedgehammer a number of years ago on purple nut sedge, and we actually found that 2 applications of Roundup or Finale provided us equal control to Sedgehammer. And so these products do work, but they have no soil residual to prevent the nut sedge from coming back. So you can do a tank mix of Roundup with the Sedgehammer, and you'll get a faster knockdown, and you'll get residual control as well. Remember, when we're using these products, they're non-selective, so they're going to kill most any plant it contacts. There are other non-selective herbicides out there, contact type products that do not translocate. We talked about the Sedgehammer is root absorbed and does translocate. The Roundup translocates from foliar absorption. Finale translocates from foliar absorption. We do have some contact type products out there, so if you're in a tight planting situation, sometimes you want a contact type herbicide so you're not causing systemic damage to landscape plants, or if you're in a nursery setting and you've got a lot of suckering at the base of the trees, if you treat those suckers late in the season, you're going to get more damage to your trees. So at that time, a contact type product would be more desirable. You could use the Reward or Finale. In a nursery setting, you can also use Gramoxone, but be very careful with it. It's a fairly toxic herbicide to handle. So again, those contact herbicides, if you get a little spray drift on an ornamental plant, you'll get some leaf spotting, some little bit of leaf necrosis, but our systemic herbicides can cause a lot more damage, particularly as we move further into late summer, early fall. Glyphosate will translocate more in deciduous plants, causing more systemic injury that you don't see until next spring. So again, you get glyphosate on some deciduous plants in the fall, you may not see any symptoms at all until the following spring when these plants start to try to grow and the new growth comes out looking like this picture. All right. So among the post-emergence herbicides, obviously glyphosate is the most widely used. There are lots and lots of formulations, lots of different concentrations. So just, you know, there are generic formulations, there are the branded formulations of Roundup and Touchdown and a few others. But they're pretty much all have exactly the same active ingredient. Where they differ is what they add to the jug. Okay, they could add different surfactants. So if it just says glyphosate as the active ingredient, you could very well have lots of different surfactants that provide better rain fastness. So for example, the Monsanto formulations are usually rain fast in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Most of the generic formulations, you need 4 to 6 hours without rainfall for them to be to reach their full activity. Okay, so there are lots and lots of formulations out there, and they pretty much all work as long as you're dealing with the same concentration of the active ingredient. There are a few different formulations out there. The rapid action formulations that tank mix glyphosate with diquat, they're fine for landscape applications where you want a quick burn down for customer satisfaction, but I would never recommend them for nursery use because when you put a rapid acting herbicide with Roundup, you will burn the leaves before all of the translocation occurs. So on a perennial weed like Bermuda grass, you're much better off going with the slower acting standard glyphosate formulations. You get much better results. Another area or type of product that is quite different are the products that contain residual materials pre-mixed. Okay, so I think I have a slide out of order. So let me just continue with the slides, and we'll get back to the pre-mixes in just a moment. So I talked about that was, you know, grasses and sedges and what all of that works. What about broadleaf weeds? We don't really have any selective options for broadleaf weeds. You know, there are a few exceptions to that. Lontrell, Casseron, and Triclopyr are labeled for use in landscape beds. You know, Casseron labeled for use in nurseries, but they can cause a lot of damage to landscape plants. So they're generally not very useful with a very few exceptions. Lontrell can be applied over the top of junipers in landscape settings to control vetch that is coming in, or thistle control. Casseron can be used around established deciduous trees and a few shrubs to control something like Florida betony, for which we have very few other options. Triclopyr can be used in landscape settings. There are special formulations for poison ivy and poison oak control or brush control, and it can be more effective than glyphosate on some of those species. But you have to be careful with these. Read the labels very carefully and research them before you use them, because of course if it's designed to kill broadleaf plants, then it has a high probability that it's going to damage some of your broadleaf ornamental plants, right? And one thing that I have seen happening in landscapes recently is a tendency of some landscape personnel to mix some synthetic auxin herbicides like 2,4-D or Triclopyr or Crossbow, unfortunately, with their Roundup, because the Roundup's not that great at killing woody weeds. You know, in this case, it was a redbud seedling, I believe, or it may have been a maple seedling. And since the glyphosate doesn't really kill liriope, I've seen this used around liriope beds. But if you get a little too much of this on, you're going to kill the liriope, especially tank mix with the auxin herbicide. And yes, it does control the woody weeds better, but these are volatile compounds, and the vapors from these treatments can move in a landscape. And this is a real situation where the landscape maintenance person was around spraying weeds around and in liriope beds with a mixture of glyphosate with an auxin herbicide not far away, was a grapevine, and here are the symptoms of the auxin herbicide vapor drift on that grapevine. So you can see this is just one of those situations we need to watch for and make sure that we advise the landscape maintenance personnel and nursery personnel that, you know, they should not succumb to the temptation of doing these applications, particularly in the middle of summer when our temperatures are so high. And with these high temperatures, we're going to get a lot more volatility of these herbicides. Even the low volatile formulations of auxins will volatilize in these temperatures. All righty, so once we've done our post-emergence weed control, we're still going to have summer annuals continuing to emerge. Now, one of the tough things to think about at this stage of the season is, you know, do we or do we not reapply a pre-emergence herbicide yet? Okay, it's very late in the season, so if we apply a pre-emergence now, that's going to really sort of change what we do in our normal application timing. Normally, we would be coming in another month for our pre-emergence application for winter annual weed control. So if we do something now, then we should not put another treatment on just 1 month later. Okay, if we do, we have to make sure that we're rotating different herbicide families and different modes of action, so we're not doubling up on our herbicide applications. So my advice is, if you've got summer annuals continuing to emerge, particularly in a landscape setting, look to why the summer annuals are coming up. Chances are the mulch layer is thin, and so top dress the mulch. Don't apply another pre-emergence at this point in time. In nurseries, probably just plan to wait, do another post-emergence application at the time you do the August or September pre-emergence treatments. Okay, so now we're back on track here. Those extended control formulations. Extended control formulations of glyphosate are out there, and in a landscape setting, it's tempting to say, well, I'm going to just use one of these extended control formulations. As I said just now, the residual from these could last a little too long, okay, and it's something to consider. But it's also something to consider that if you use these residual type formulations either now or anytime during the season or even this fall before you plant, you're using these formulations as a site preparation tool, you can get into trouble. They're fine for hardscapes because we're not going to try to grow anything else there, so use those there. But they can cause damage to some ornamentals. This is Roundup Extended damage to Allura petalum. And this damage is purely from root uptake of the residual component of imazepyc. On the far left-hand side is the residual material called Durazone, sold to commercial landscapers as Spectacle Total, okay? And it does not have this soil root systemic uptake, root uptake and systemic movement to the growing points. Roundup Extended has this. So when you're doing some weed control or site preparation before planting, you don't want to use these. Here's an application of the Roundup before we planted some bedding plants in a mulch bed, and you'll see some pigweed and stuff come in. Well, that's normal. You know, some annual weeds are going to start to grow, and you have to have a management plan for that. But if you use the residual materials, in this case, this is Roundup Extended, you can see how dramatically these bedding plants were affected. And this would happen with a fall planting of pansies as well, the Roundup Extended is leaving a residual in that soil that is going to control weeds, but it also is going to damage herbaceous plants and maybe even some of the woody plants you have in that bed. All right, so we're going to continue to have weeds germinating, so obviously the winter weeds, it's kind of hard to think about winter weeds when we're in the middle of a heat wave, but within the next 6 weeks, we have to really be serious about our pre-emergent plans for winter annual weed control, because these weeds are going to start germinating in September as soon as the soil starts to cool down and has better soil moisture. So in late summer, early fall, what are the things we need to think about going forward here? Pre-emergence for winter annual weeds and post-emergence for perennial broadleaf weeds. So the idea is we want to stop the winter annuals before they emerge so we don't have this kind of a setting, although I must say the henbit in full flower does look rather pretty against a forsythia in full bloom, but generally we try to avoid this. That just means we have hand weeding to do later on, right? So winter annual weeds are best controlled with a pre-emergence application applied in late August or certainly by the 1st of September. If you're going to be putting bedding plants into that area, then hold off on the application until after you have transitioned the color beds. So if you got pansy beds, a heuchera, or just any color bed, don't do a pre-emergence application until you have transitioned that bed. Okay. In the fall, the preen formulation containing trifluralin or Treflan, or if you can just get Treflan 5G, that works really well on most of our common winter annual broadleaf weeds like henbit, chickweed, annual bluegrass. There are going to be a few that are not controlled, but in bedding plants, we don't have a lot of options. Okay, in woody beds, we have a lot more herbicides available. And in field production of woody plants, we have broad spectrum herbicides available. Okay, and so we can choose a more effective product because we have lots and lots of products labeled, right? So what are you going to choose? Well, that depends on the target weeds and the plants that you're trying to produce or maintain. In landscape settings and in nurseries, we use a lot of what we call dinitroaniline herbicides. These are old products that we have used for many, many years. Surflan, Treflan, Barricade, okay, pendimethalin or pendulum. Those are dinitroanilines. They're safe on a lot of woody ornamentals. The trifluralin and the pendimethalin are safe on lots of herbaceous ornamentals. So they give pretty broad spectrum control, but they have a few weaknesses. And so we have other products that are more effective on broadleaf weeds like Gallery and SureGuard or Broadstar and Freehand. But when a herbicide is more effective on broadleaf weeds, that translates to problems with injury to herbaceous ornamentals. So remember, more effective on broadleaf weeds, more risk to the ornamentals. And so we try to find that right balance of efficacy and safety, always starting with safety as the most important characteristic. So I mentioned our dinitroaniline herbicides. Okay, we've been using them for years and years. They're very effective on some of our most common cool season weeds like annual bluegrass. As shown in this slide, we have, clockwise, annual bluegrass, wood sorrel, horseweed, henbit, chickweed. So our dinitroanilines work very well on this, but there's some variability among those herbicides. And again, the herbicides that are in this class are Surflan, Pendulum, Barricade, and Treflan, available in granular formulations, spray formulations. Okay, because they're effective on a lot of weeds, but there are some weaknesses. They're not particularly effective on Galansoga, which is in the middle picture. They're not effective on purslanes, that's in the top picture. We often will combine that with something like Gallery. Okay, in field nurseries, we'll combine a dinitroaniline with something like SureGuard or with simazine, for broadleaf weed control. We've never used simazine in a landscape setting. Okay, we prefer something like Gallery in a landscape setting because it's safer on a lot of our woody ornamentals. But it will still injure herbaceous plants, and we should not use them in most herbaceous plantings or in bedding plants. Because the combination of the dinitroaniline with the gallery is an effective combination where we get our grass control, we get our fairly broad spectrum broadleaf weed control. Thus, one of the most commonly used pre-emergence herbicides in container nurseries and in landscape plantings is Snapshot TG. That's a combination of gallery plus Treflan. Gives pre-emergence annual grass and broadleaf weed control. In the fall, it provides very good control of a lot of weeds. It does not control Carolina, excuse me. It can be a little weak on bittercress. It does not control Phyllanthus in the summer. It does not control Carolina geranium in the fall, and it's not very good on vetch either, okay? It is safe on what we often refer to as blue-collar perennials like liriope, daylily, hostas, peony, astilbe, irises. So it can be used on a lot of our standard tough perennials, but it does cause injury to bedding plants. And thinking of fall, it definitely injures pansies. So we would never use that there. Alrighty, so there are a lot of herbicides available, and how do you get more information about it? So you want to know a little bit more about Snapshot. I've put together fact sheets on all of the herbicides, all right, and they're available from my website, and these are actually in the Extension Resource Catalog, and they're in part of a series called Herbicide Information Fact Sheets. So, for example, you wanted to know something about Snapshot, you'd search Snapshot in that listing, or just look at the herbicide, search the herbicide information fact sheets, and you can scroll and browse through the whole listing of all the herbicides that are labeled for use in ornamental plantings. And in these fact sheets, we're going to see information about what the product is, what its active ingredients are, the formulations that are available, what it's used for, what are the recommended doses, what weeds does it control, what weeds does it not control, what's its mode of action, what's its propensity for leaching and volatility. So it really summarizes, some of the key points about each of the herbicides. So again, not every herbicide has a fact sheet, but I'm working my way through the whole list, but we've got most of them already available. Now, how do you go about choosing the right product? Number one is safety, number two is efficacy, and then you look at the other traits like formulation and cost after that. So if you're in woody plantings, whether that's container nurseries, field nurseries, or landscapes, we have lots of choices. We have broad spectrum herbicides like Broadstar SureGuard, Spectacle, Marengo, Snapshot, Surfland, Rigolo O, Gallery, plus barricade sprays. Occasionally, you can use Casseron in the winter to control some perennial weeds like Florida betony. So I have lots and lots of choices. So it's a lot easier to choose based on ornamental plant safety when you're dealing with woody plants, right? But there are exceptions, and you also always want to be looking for what you should not be doing. And where do you find that? You find that in the tables that we have summarized. You could read all the labels and get this information, but we did that work for you and summarized the information in these charts and tables that are available on my website. And this is showing just an excerpt of one of those charts where you can look and see which herbicide is labeled for various plants, whether it's labeled for field/landscape settings or field and container nursery settings, right? Well, what does it mean to say that it's labeled or registered? That means the company warranties the herbicide to be safe on those species. It does not mean that it's legal to use it on one species and not legal to use it on another. All of these herbicides carry what's called a site label. You can use a herbicide, if it's labeled for the landscape, you can use it on plants that are not on the label, right? It's legal. but you're taking the risk, or your clients are taking the risk. So as an extension agent, we need to be very careful about how we recommend these things, because we want to make sure that your clients understand that, you know, you can use Snapshot on a whole wide variety of plants, but the only plants that we can say it is safe on are the ones that are listed on the label. Those are the ones that the company warranties and guarantees the safety. Okay, but you know, the companies and we cannot test every single plant that's out there in the landscape. So growers and landscapers always are taking a little bit of a risk. You know, for example, one of the most popular landscape plants out there today is Distillium, and there are no herbicides labeled for use on Distillium. But we know they're being produced in container nurseries, and container nursery operators are using pre-emergence herbicides. Landscapers are putting them in the ground. They're using pre-emergence herbicides. So we know we can do that safely. But I will tell you this, in a nursery setting, we've seen significant injury from some of the pre-emergence herbicides on Distillium. Okay, so in a landscape bed, I would never use Dimension. We've had some significant injuries. Landscape or nursery, don't use Dimension on Distillium. We've seen a little injury from freehand when the doses get too high and we do multiple applications. So it tends to be a little sensitive in nursery situations. So watch your doses. Make sure you're going with some standard products like, you know, Snapshot and Biathlon or Scott's OH2 are applied at the labeled rates, have not caused injury. So again, that's an example that, you know, these herbicides are labeled for use in container nurseries. You know, the Snapshot is labeled for use in landscape settings. Okay, we can use them on the Distillium, but the companies who manufacture that do not warranty its safety. Okay. All right. In landscape plant situations or in nursery situations, herbaceous plants are more sensitive to herbicide damage than are woodies, and the safety varies among the species very significantly. So again, we've gone through the labels, we've summarized the information of what you can and should not do with pre-emergence herbicides on herbaceous plants. And these charts are available also on my website. They're also, and here's a photograph on the left-hand side. That's my portal, weed management in nurseries, landscapes, and Christmas trees. Perhaps the easiest way to find that is just to go to Google and type in my name, Joe Neal, NCSU, and this is the page that will come up in the search engine. These tables have also been included along with a lot of other content in the Southeastern U.S. Pest Control Guide for Nursery Crops and Landscape Plantings. So if you haven't gotten a copy of that, then talk with your area specialized agent about that. Or shoot me an email and we'll get you a copy. Fortunately, we were able to get some funding to do a print run and to provide agents with this. It is available for your clients. Okay, it is available for free download or free viewing. And again, from my website, you can follow the links directly to it, or just type the Southeastern U.S. Pest Control Guide for Nursery Crops and Landscape Plantings. Type that into Google, and it'll take you to either the site on my website or the site for the Southern Nursery IPM Working Group, which worked on this publication. This is an effort of about 18 authors throughout the Southeast, pulling information together. So it's a good guide, and if you haven't looked through it, please do. And if you see anything, you got any feedback for me, if it's useful or not, please let me know, because we are already starting to talk about, what do we need to do to edit this and update it for 2018. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right, so for landscapers, winter color bed season is coming up. So what can we say specifically about color beds? We know we're going to have pansies in them. Almost every winter color bed is going to have pansies. So we got to be careful. Pansies and violas are sensitive to herbicides. They're injured by surfland, pendulum, barricade, regalcade, snapshot, you name it, spectacle, almost all of them, except trifluralin, which is sold in retail as Preen, but you can still get occasionally at some of the farm supply stores, you can get a Treflan 5G. And as I mentioned before, the Treflan or pendimethalin is a dinitroaniline and is pretty good on our winter annual weeds. XL is a granular formulation of Surflan, and at the low dose, it's okay on pansies, but if you increase the dose, you can get some stunting. Pennant Magnum is a sprayable formulation that is labeled for use on pansies. If they're in full flower, you'll probably burn the petals. But the plant will tolerate Pennant Magnum. It's not quite as good on some of our winter annual weeds as is trifluralin. So for other plants, just look at those charts and tables, and you'll find which treatments are safe, which ones are not. A few things to avoid in your winter color beds: Broadstar, SureGuard, Freehand, Snapshot, Spectacle, Surfland, Gallery, Tower. This is what the tower injury looks like on the foliage, on the petals when the application is made when the plants are in full bloom. So fortunately, it did not injure the next crop of flowers that came up, but you can get some significant injury. Bottom line, anything that's really good on broadleaf weeds tended to damage pansies. All right, so once we've selected our herbicide based on crop safety, then we need to think about, well, what weeds does it control? Grasses are easy to control. Almost all of the herbicides labeled for use in landscape and nursery settings control summer annual and winter annual grasses. The variability comes with broadleaf weeds. So in the color beds, as I mentioned, you're going to sacrifice some efficacy for safety. In the woody beds, we can be more focused on efficacy of getting the target weeds that we're after, right? So just for example, again, winter annual weeds, if you're going into a pansy bed, then I've highlighted, Preen or Treflan, we don't think of as being all that effective on a lot of weeds, but it's pretty good on the most important weeds we have germinating in the fall, okay? Bittercress, it's okay on in the fall. Not in the spring, but in the fall it works okay. Chickweed, it's good on. Henbit, it's actually better than some of the other herbicides, okay? But it does not control vetch, okay? It was actually developed for weed control in soybeans. So vetch is a legume, soybean is a legume, so these products don't work very well on vetch. So for vetch control, my advice is a lot of sanitation to prevent it from going to seed and prevent it from getting established. So again, we've got tables for crop safety. We have tables for efficacy that are available on my website and in the guide for Southeastern Guide for Pest Control. Now, early autumn, late summer, early autumn is a great time to start thinking about post-emergence control of perennial weeds. We think of this timing mainly because of glyphosate, right? Glyphosate works better in late summer, early fall on weeds that are going to be losing their leaves before winter. So before a weed, whether it's a woody weed like a vine or a tree sapling or a shrub or an herbaceous plant like bindweed or mugwort as shown here, those plants are preparing for winter by translocating their sugars and amino acids down into the stem and then down to the roots, right? So as they do that, if we apply glyphosate at that time, it's actually an analog of an amino acid. So the plant handles it like it's a small amino acid, translocates that down into the stem and the root for winter storage. Okay, so you get more translocation down into the roots when you apply glyphosate in late summer, early fall. And then you see the results the following spring, in that herbaceous plants just don't grow back. Woody plants start to mobilize all of their stored carbohydrates and amino acids up to the growing points, and the glyphosate goes right along with them to the growing points next year and starts to work on the plant the following spring. So generally speaking, autumn is the time to apply glyphosate. But be careful, because all those same rules about translocation influence the amount of injury you get on your desirable plants. Like if you hit some of the root suckers with glyphosate in late summer, you stand a higher probability of causing injury to an ornamental, woody ornamental, and that injury will be seen, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see that injury the following year, okay? Conifers are different, or evergreens in general are more sensitive to glyphosate injury in the spring when they're starting new growth. And the theory goes there, why are they more sensitive in the spring? The theory is, ask yourself this question: how does an evergreen prepare for winter? It's not translocating all of its sugars out of the leaves and down into the stems and roots. It is breaking apart all of the long chain molecules in the leaves and keeping them there, so it's increasing its solute concentrations in the leaves to protect against freezing right there in the leaves. So the glyphosate stays right there with those other solutes right in the leaves. And what happens in the spring is all of that gets mobilized for both shoot and root growth. So the old leaves that were holding on to all this stuff over the winter are now active in the spring, mobilizing these all of these sugars and amino acids, and they're moving all over the plant, and the glyphosate will move with it. So you tend to get more injury on evergreens when glyphosate is applied in the springtime on new growth than in the fall. Okay. Also, post-emergence control in the fall, annual bluegrass will be coming up with those selective grass herbicides. The only one that works on annual bluegrass is Envoy. Okay, so you want to catch it when it's young because it's very slow acting, but Envoy will control annual bluegrass if you get it started in your winter beds. All righty, so where do you get this information? Go to my portal, Weed Management and Landscapes, and you know, I'll have links to all of these tables, links to the guides for the pest control guides, links to the herbicide information sheets, links to fact sheets, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the end of my tale today. Do I have any questions out there?
If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. Or I believe you can also use your microphone if you have any specific questions. Now would be a good time to ask Joe.
Let's see, I can see the chat box now. So what would you recommend for post-emergence control of creeping cucumber and juniper beds? Lisa, yeah, probably a shovel, steel in the ground. This is one that we really don't have anything that's particularly effective on it, and it is a perennial. It comes back from a thick root system, And if you cut that up, that root will sprout and form a new plant. So spot spray with glyphosate under that canopy of the juniper as you can without damaging the plant. Pull it out of there before it sets seed, because it will grow back from seed as well as those root bits. An application of SureGuard will probably burn the foliage of the vine and may burn that vine down to the ground, and SureGuard can be applied over the top of a juniper, but it's not going to be the panacea that we're really looking for. Lawn Trail will cause it to cup and twist, but doesn't kill it. So this is one that we really don't have an easy answer for. Sorry. Somebody else ask me an easy question, please. I like easy.
All right, any more questions for Joe? All right, Joe, I guess we'll sign off of here. And as usual, if anyone has questions for Joe, he's pretty good to answer via email. Pretty easy to get a hold of. So thanks everybody for joining us. And we'll be doing another webinar in the fall. So if you have any topics you'd like to see covered, feel free to email one of us and just let us know, and we'll do our best to accommodate that. But we're trying to create a better connection between the department and agents. So hopefully we've been doing that with some of the trainings we've been doing. And if you have any suggestions, just please let us know. So thank you, Joe, for speaking today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for participating.